it did in this occasion, it makes it all the more special for that kind of long, drawn-out journey.
Yeah, I was going to refer to that piece in the front of the Guardian anyway. I mean, Jason spoke there about how, tomorrow's writing will reflect the kind of the quality of the event, the epic nature of the occasion. And I think also in terms of, I suppose, how journalism works on nights like this, where it's not necessarily a news story that dominates all the front pages, but actually the pure description of events like that, because papers want to capture the spirit of the moment. And just on exactly the point you've made there, I mean, Barney Ronay and in the front page Guardian piece there has a nice line about where he says, imagine trying to explain this to someone from Denmark and going through the details of the day and how in some ways nothing actually happened, but everything happened. And he even used you have to use terms like nuance, geopolitics, post-colonialism. And I have to say, look, Denmark, as Barney's hinted there, not a cricket heartland. As you can tell from my accent and my first name, I'm from two countries, not exactly cricket heartlands, but Ireland has actually, it has seen a boom in popularity there. And yet, even for someone like myself, and as Barney's kind of laid out, there's just so many elements of a day like that you can't, I mean, it's pure sport, so you can't help be kind of just captured in by. And above all, I was trying to think there, I can't really remember too many images in modern sport of Woakes coming down like that, where somehow, are we talking, I mean, it's probably beyond Terry Butcher and his headband in the late 80s. And that's just one image of a day that had all sorts of elements and strands and storylines to it.
Yeah, and I guess, Jason, as well, the fact England only needed 35 runs because, of course, the rain came down at the end of day 4 and people were bemoaning the fact that crowd on that day deserved to see a climax on that evening. But what it did do is it meant there were, tickets were cheaper. We weren't sure how many people were going to turn up to watch what was only going to be kind of 45 minutes of play. The answer was a lot of people, a lot of Indian fans to come and watch their heroes. But that made it, it's a bit like those old kind of Mondays or Sundays at Wimbledon when just the doors open and people just rock in. It was a brilliant atmosphere.
It was absolutely fantastic, as you say. The sounds alone, the celebrations, the tension as the wickets began to fall, and England, as I say, looked like they began to panic as well. And almost that kind of piece of theatre within this epic series in itself was fantastic, and the way it played out and the drama of it all, as Miguel says, with Woakes coming down. I can't remember last time that happened either in cricket. I think it might have been Cowdrey in the 1950s, maybe. I think that happened once before. So extraordinary scenes all round, and as you say, the full house inside the stadium, and everyone knowing that there would be some sort of climax, some sort of finish, some sort of drama today to end it all. And we got every element of that in what was an extraordinary ending to the Test series.
Yeah, I think it was Colin Cowdrey, 1963, and he had to come down and he didn't have to face, he just had to hang around for 2 balls at the non-striker's end. There was never any danger of him facing a ball. Woakes, of course, could have got stuck down the striker's end. That didn't happen. But if we look at the back of the Times, Miguel, series for the ages, I guess that the bigger picture with Test cricket, a few years ago there were concerns that it might be dying a bit of a death. It's certainly not as popular in other parts of the world than it is in this country. But this is being lauded as the best series since the great 2005 Ashes. And Test cricket needs series like this to keep it relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to say, it does feel like, as an external observer of the sport, it doesn't write about it. It does seem to constantly go through these cycles where there's questions about its direction and interest, and then it produces theatre like this. Now, this is probably beyond a lot of it, but also I think this is all the more relevant in terms of, say, discussions about even where football is going, or where a lot of sports have to go to try and compete with football, where no matter how you try and tinker with a sport, no matter how you try and kind of update its rules, there's really nothing like the kind of pure basic or elemental nature of a sport where it's 2 teams that there's edge between them. They really want to win. And I know that's such a basic thing to say, but where there's the extra depth of emotion because of the edge between the teams. And it just kind of spools out into all sorts of storylines that, of course, enriches the sport as it's played. Because that's what really makes sports. It's storylines and drama that foster emotion. And this had all of it, as well as, even if you look at today, I suppose, we're talking about almost two different stories of defiance, really. There's Woakes with that physical defiance, and India, I suppose, as well. I mean, Jason spoke about there how maybe the inquest into England, it'll possibly wait a day or two. But look, I suppose India, were they looked finished in 2 different tests and came back, one for a draw and one for a victory.
Yeah, I mean, it's been brilliant in both regards, as you mentioned. I mean, Jason, you talked about the inquest. England haven't beaten Australia for a while. They drew 2-2 a couple of years ago. They've now drawn 2-2 with India. They've lost series away from home. And, of course, it is the Ashes next. India, Australia, England, the big 3 in the cricket world. Australia next. And it kind of sets it up really nicely for the Ashes down under.
Yeah, it does. I think it's actually 7 series now that England haven't beaten either Australia or India. I might be right in saying that. But if they'd won this series, then obviously it would have been a fantastic launch pad to go to the Ashes with. Now there are obviously serious questions. One thing that it highlighted to me was really England's dependency on Ben Stokes. They're completely a different team when he's fit and available. And to be fair to them, they're also missing Jofra Archer, Mark Wood. So there were mitigating circumstances in the team that they put out and effectively played with 10 men. Because of Woakes' injury. So there are lots of factors to explain how England didn't win. But actually, it was there to be won. And I think that's the worrying thing for them. There'll be moments throughout this Test series where they really should have, gone for the jugular, won this series convincingly and set themselves up well for the Ashes. Now, unfortunately, there are questions that need answering around team selection, tactics, and as I say, the dependency on Stokes, which is not surprising, but they're just a different team when he's around. I don't think Ollie Pope pushed his case to be captain in Stokes' absence. So a lot of questions again over what happens when Stokes isn't available and the fitness of other players. But yeah, as you say, for all the brilliance of Bazball, for all the things it's achieved, for how it's propelled England Test cricket and made it much more enjoyable, really, and positive and so on, they haven't actually got themselves over the line against the other big 2 yet for a number of series. And I think that makes the pressure going forward to Australia even more.
OK, those questions and that inquest for another day. We're just going to kind of marvel at what's been a brilliant series. Right, moving on to, we're going to go back to The Guardian. And Miguel, in the right-hand column there, players claim £1 billion compensation from FIFA. This is from Matt Hughes. It's quite a kind of punchy headline. And just explain this one to us.
So this actually comes from a legal case from October. People might remember at least the bare details, or maybe the basic name, which is Lassana Diarra, who took a case against FIFA over his inability to make a move from a Russian club at a time. Now, when that judgment came out in October, it was one of those that a lot of the people close to Diarra and I suppose people on a lot of player representative sides were talking about it as how it was a potential Bosman and how it was going to change the transfer market because of, I suppose it was going to upend the rules and who could move after a contract was up and how you could move. Now, on the other side, on I suppose the side closer to the football associations, the argument was, it's just going to be minor changes. The game can weather it. Now, that was somewhat contradicted by a few months later, FIFA sending out a questionnaire to a lot of stakeholders in football, wondering how they were going to deal with the aftermath of this. And I suppose this is often the case with such. This is often the issue with such cases. We're talking about legal precedent, which often take a while to be tested. Now, in this case, it's taken less than a year. And it is, so this action, which is taken by potentially thousands of players around the world for loss of earnings from the way the transfer rulings were structured since 2002, they've given FIFA until September to respond. The FA have been notified, but given they're in the FIFA structure, I suppose they're at least indirectly at the moment part of the case. But I think what's really interesting about this, even more so than the specific details about the case, is it's just another moment in modern football in the last 2-3 years where FIFA and UEFA, and I suppose the football authorities, as we discussed it, have been challenged or successfully challenged through competition law, or in this case, through labour law, and are gradually having the duopoly at the top of the game tested or potentially reshaped. And while, yes, it might take a while for the full effects of this to be seen, I think it is starting to grow. And I think that's all the more interesting, given we've discussed in the show before, say, FIFA is running the modern game and kind of how the Club World Cup has gone, Infantino and Trump. And even on the other side, how UEFA has created the new Champions League is almost a compromise after the Super League. Well, we're in a very unpredictable era in football where a lot, or even more, is going to go through the courts. And this could actually be kind of another one of these starting moments.
Yeah, precedent being set. Jason, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I don't. I take on board what Miguel's saying. I don't see it as a sort of a Bosman Mark II just yet. I don't think it's quite as revolutionary as that. I think a lot of the case with Diarra was, I might be wrong in saying, but I think it's more to do with the compensation he was ordered to pay because he got out of a contract that existed rather than any other factor in terms of his transfer. But I do think it's a really interesting sort of judgment, and it's a really interesting class action that's potentially looming now, involving quite a lot of footballers. It seems the lawyers involved are actually kind of trawling around looking for other cases to try and obviously beef up their own case. In saying all that, the European Court has obviously come out in favour of this in the initial action, and obviously contravening European law. So we've seen in the past how that has been a catalyst for change in football, especially, as I say, with Bosman. It doesn't feel quite as revolutionary as that just yet. It could be. I think there is a huge issue around contracts and players and negotiations and transfer fees. Agents obviously are pushing this very, very hard in terms of saying it's going to be revolutionary. And it will be quite interesting to see how much momentum it gets behind it, whether or not enough players actually do get behind this ruling and actually decide to sort of take action themselves. Interestingly, the English FA aren't quite involved yet. You think they would be, as one of the major leagues in the world, obviously the Premier League, but we'll see. At the moment, I'm not quite as excited about it as The Guardian, but we'll see.
Yeah, Miguel, just wondering where the public kind of perception sits on this, because headline players claim £1 billion compensation from FIFA. Players obviously well remunerated generally around the world. Jason mentions their agents getting involved. I mean, this is essentially about money, isn't it? So I just wonder where that public perception sits.
I mean, there probably won't be too much sympathy for the public precisely because of what you've mentioned. I mean, since 2002, which is the moment, I suppose, the date this extends back to, or the date potential claims extend back to, we've seen this explosion in player wages. It won't all be about the top end. But that's why, actually, I do agree with Jason. I'm not sure it's necessarily about the case specifically that is big here. I think the more significant element is that, we've in football for at least a century, we've operated under the idea that FIFA and UEFA are the ultimate authorities in the world game, and just underneath that, the European game. And I think this is the latest of many rulings that challenges that authority, and that's where I think the real repercussions will come. Because I mean, if we're talking about how there was actually a similar case, another relevant case in the past few days, which was about how now rulings in the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which of course have taken on, or where you can appeal all major decisions from FIFA and UEFA, that they can now be challenged in national courts to assess whether they're consistent with EU law. So it's just another element where the ultimate authority of FIFA and UEFA, which has pretty much been unquestioned for a century, is suddenly being challenged. And that at a moment where it feels like FIFA and UEFA actually are trying to reach for more power. Again, I realise these are very dry details, but they do ultimately, over the long term, actually dictate what happens on the pitch itself.
Great stuff. OK, gents, for now, thank you very much. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll look at more of the sports stories in the morning papers, including this. In the Mirror, vexed in the city as Daniel Levy delivers a rare interview. him out, and that is Alan Shearer talking about Alexander Isak. What impact could that have on Isak's future? A legend like Alan Shearer saying that.
Yes, absolutely, and that's a real heartfelt comment from a Newcastle legend himself and a Newcastle fan, and I think probably reflects the way a lot of Newcastle fans feel about this situation at the moment. Obviously, Alexander Isak has every right, as every footballer does, to look at his future, but obviously he's got 3 years left on his contract at Newcastle, and he's their star player. He's the jewel in the crown. He's the one that want to lead them into the Champions League. And as Eddie Howe said the other day, no player has really a right just to come back and train, having effectively, sort of taken himself out of the group. And there was that sort of strange situation where he went back to Spain with the club not really knowing why he was doing that and training on his own and so on and so forth. So it's become the saga of the summer. It probably will carry on for quite some time yet. I think the Newcastle fans and Newcastle as a club is feeling very bruised about this, not least because they've struggled to get other deals over the line, and having qualified for the Champions League that are hoped to have strengthened quite significantly by now. There's a real sort of soul searching going on at Newcastle over the leadership of the club. Obviously the Saudis own it, but there is issues around the sporting director having gone in Paul Mitchell, the replacement yet to be signed up. Eddie Howe was sort of holding the fort together a little bit himself, the CEO needing to be replaced and so on and so forth. So an awful lot going on at Newcastle, and Isak has now put himself front and centre of all of that, and I think it will take some time for it all to heal. My gut feeling, if you're going to ask me, is will he be a Newcastle player at the end of this window, is no. I think he probably will go to Liverpool. I think that, although Liverpool said at the end of last week that was their one and only bid, I just don't find that quite hard to believe. Certainly as a negotiating tactic in itself, it's quite hard to believe that they just put one and only bid in. I know they're saying they got a very firm rebuttal from Newcastle, but it does feel like this is going to run for a bit longer. And not least because I think something else we'll touch on now is obviously Benjamin Sesko and whether or not Newcastle are going to sign him. And that looks like it's going to be a deal that might come to a head tomorrow in terms of actually their bid being accepted. Okay, well, we'll get to Benjamin Sesko in just a bit. But Miguel, where do you stand on kind of unhappy players, let them go, or he's got 3 years on his contract left, make him stay and play? Where do you stand on this?
I've probably maybe got a slightly unorthodox stance on this, in that in normal circumstances, I'm usually of the mind that no player is irreplaceable. Sell them, get the money in, and actually you can spend it smartly. But I think that is dependent on, and this touches on something Jason just discussed there, depending on have a proper structure. So if you do have to sell one of your better players, or if a bid comes in, you have a plan in place. And obviously that's been the proof of what many would say is the best run club in the Premier League over the past decade, Brighton. Obviously Newcastle do not have that structure right now, which only complicates. And as you know, Jason mentioned how they're bruised. And I think that's possibly because they didn't, well, if they expected a lot of interest about Isak this summer, because they knew of Arsenal's interest for a long time. They knew of growing interest across Europe because he's one of the best players in the world at the moment. They probably didn't expect this level of agitation from him. And I suppose that's maybe another lesson about this, that ultimately if a player, or certainly if a big player wants to force his way out, they usually can, just because there's the other side of the equation, which is that after a while it becomes a bigger problem for the club who own him to have to put up with a player who doesn't want to be there. So you're better off cashing in. But of course, again, we return to this other side of the problem, which is where Sesko might come in, that if you're going to sell, you want to have a plan in place. And this summer, at least, after recruiting quite well for the past 3 years, including Isak, Newcastle have been slow in the market.
OK, David Ornstein, friend of the show, of course. We get on to the Benjamin Sesko. Jason, RB Leipzig receive improved offer from Newcastle for Sesko. You said you think this is going to move quite significantly tomorrow. Tell us why.
Yeah, I do. I think this bid might well be one that Leipzig will accept, actually, and then it really is up to the player. And indications up until this point have been that he prefers Manchester United. Manchester United have had formal conversations now, but have yet to actually table a bid for him. But I think one of the other things that's come out this evening is that Sesko might now be thinking about more seriously joining Newcastle after all, and especially if they're going to put in this level of bid for him and it's going to be accepted. So it's whether or not Manchester United will come back quickly themselves now and try and counter with an offer of their own, or whether or not they feel they were hoping that the price would come down because they felt that Sesko was more inclined to join them. So I think it really is coming to a head. I don't think it will carry on for much longer, this this mini saga within the saga. And I think then we'll be looking at what happens with Isak, because obviously Newcastle will argue that they signed Sesko to play with Isak in the way they looked at Ekitike before he joined Liverpool. But most of us still believe that actually they need to sign replacements for Isak before they can countenance selling him. And obviously Johan Visser was another player they were looking at from Brentford, although that's obviously proving another difficult deal for them to land. So I think that element of the story will be sorted out in the next couple of days, might provide a bit more clarity as to where the whole thing is heading and what it means for Isak as well, and whether or not Liverpool will actually come in with an improved offer or won't.
Yeah, interesting, this whole kind of two clubs interested in Sesko. So Newcastle very keen on him, but if they have him nicked from under their nose by Manchester United, that would be even more bad news for Newcastle. How strong is United's interest, Miguel?
Yeah, I mean, they've made it quite clear that if they are to go for a striker this summer, he has become the number one choice. But that if is so big, of course, because, I mean, although I think United have played down how much they need to sell, everyone else in the market seems to think that United, at least if they were to sign Sesko, it would increase the need to sell after that. But that's what I mean. We're talking about all sorts of posturing here and the games of the window. And within that game, there's also the dominoes, because say there's obviously been more murmurs over the past 48 hours about Garnacho's future. If Garnacho were to go to Chelsea, as has basically been mooted since January, it does suddenly make that a lot easier for Manchester United, who would have much less difficulty in going all in for Sesko. But yeah, right now, there's a lot of brinkmanship, a lot of kind of posturing. But as Jason said, it does feel like it's one of those that's going to be forced ahead. Because I think with Sesko as well, you do wonder how much what's happened earlier this summer is influencing him, because I think up until early June, he expected to go to Arsenal. Now, I think Gyökeres...
Miguel, we've run out of time. Apologies, but thanks.